Welcome to Our Next Existence by Katie and the Chorus. I'm Katie, former technology strategist turned reluctant spiritual medium, and I channel messages from the Chorus, a group of beings just beyond our sensory perceptions who are loving, expansive, and who greatly enjoy sharing their perspective of us. Join us each week as we share and discuss their ideas about humanity's existence, purpose, and future. Concepts you can draw from to accelerate your path, expand your perceptions, and ultimately step into the flow of the universe and your life. Welcome back, everybody. I didn't have anywhere to be this morning, so I was just wandering through the internet, and somehow I landed on a YouTube channel all about relationships. And the channel is called Jimmy on Relationships. And Jimmy, thank you, because I feel like the content's excellent. In fact, there was part of me that was like, where were you 20 years ago? Because I could have used this. So, one of the videos I end up on is dating red flags. And I did this as sort of like would I have recognized flags in my own relationship? If you listen to the episode on divorce, a few episodes ago, you know that I recently got divorced, and I'm processing still, I think, a lot of not only what happened from a very basic five senses reality sort of sense, but also energetically and expansively and awakeningly. How does this relationship story evolve with us, or does it? So I'm watching the, red flags and being like, okay, would I have seen the red flags? Obviously everything happened as it needed to, blah, blah, blah. But, you kind of wonder. And I was struck by how apt the advice is. But I was also again brought to a new understanding of this aspect of relationships for survival that the Chorus brought up in that episode on divorce. And I've been a little flippant lately, and I've started calling them survival buddies. That we all come here in an experience of limitation where we are insufficient on our own, and we need these villages and tribes and relationships. And so you come down onto the game board and you pick a survival buddy, right? It's how we procreate. It's how we balance out what we each have to contribute and what we each need from someone else to contribute. So anyways, I was watching this video and I was blown away by how entirely accurate it was for professional selection of a survival buddy. And at the same time, how the advice doesn't exactly extend into a spiritual context. And I don't know it does. So I'll give you an example. Okay, so Jimmy says, and he's right. So Jimmy says, one of the first red flags to look for is, are you in different life stages? This is a good indicator of trouble down the road. So the example he gives is, let's say the other person still likes to party a lot and you don't, and you want to start a family, right? There's an incongruence. And maybe that person will grow out of it, we might say, or change, but already you're not sort of in the same footing. That is excellent advice for the choice of a survival buddy. That's true here. If we are in different life phases, sometimes that's not really ever overcome. Years later, your partner still wants to blow off steam by going out to party, and years later, maybe you don't. Okay. But now contrast that with what the Chorus is talking about. And in this context, in this specific example, that would assume that there is an idea of life stages. That would assume that there is stress here that needs to be blown off. That would assume that there are people who maybe look for connection or that levity of feeling by way of moving things around in the five senses reality, like driving to a party and drinking something, as opposed to direct and immediate energetic expansion by way of turning on the heart switch, which is what we're going to get to more in this season. So do you see how, yes, given the underlying elements of the game board, that is very good advice in the choice of a survival buddy. But once you start to question the underlying aspects of the game board, some of this stuff stops sticking as well. To give a comparison from my life in this year, things changed so suddenly and so rapidly within a 24-hour period that I am at times hard-pressed to even remember by the end of the day everything that happened through it. And we'll talk about memory in just a second. So the idea that there are life stages, that these things may not change, that a person's personality or disposition has these tendencies that persist over long periods of time, potentially even the duration of their lifetime, all of that gets thrown into question when you start experiencing energetic frequencies where stuff happens fast and all the time and changes, and you realize something new about yourself every other day, and you see something about the way you behaved or the way you believed. And then now that you see that, you don't believe it in the same way anymore. It's not even like you have to practice believing something else. It's just this rapid, sudden recognition. And in recognizing it, it is changed. I think in the choice of a survival buddy, as we've talked about, even in terms of attraction, where we expect them to physically look kind of the same, with different aspects of deterioration, like you're you and you're going to get more wrinkly, but you're you, right? And I am attracted to you. We even have that underlying premise of even that will stay relatively consistent. Whereas where the chorus is coming from, you could change your physical format billions of times per second if you wished. As usual, they are both true. And they both have aspects of us to reflect to us. The ways that we engaged in the game, the ways in which we were five senses purely, strictly, for the experience of limitation, are reflections of the greater aspects of who we are. So, okay, maybe you had a traumatic childhood. The way you went through the traumatic childhood has elements of you in it, that larger you. The childhood in and of itself, the trauma in and of itself is not definitive of who you are. It was an aspect of the game board that you were passing through. And then as we go even further, it expands, right? So then we start to remember different places, time places, as we've talked about in the recent episodes, different time places that we have also been to. And those experiences also, as the chorus would say, still on the game board, reflect to us more of who we are, even here. This relates to getting back to the concept of the infinite database that we talked about a lot in season 1. That the mind is sort of constructed here, the limited mind, the five senses mind, let's say, because thinking does change. Thinking is different on different wavelengths. So we can't just like write off thinking and be like, whoop, done with that. That was terrible and limiting, right? It's not that thinking is the limitation. It is that a certain set of beliefs that drive the particular patterns of thinking in this context were what was limiting. So you think differently on different wavelengths. And it's not even to say that you would think a different thought. I mean, yes, of course, that's possible. But also the ratio of thinking in your overall presence of being is what shifts around. So as we expand into other frequencies, or rather into more of our spiritual tool set, you may run more of your day by intuition than by analysis. It's not to say that analysis disappears completely, depending on what frequency you're on and what you're experiencing. But here, there's a lot of non-stop churning of the mind in the background, just all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. And some people aren't even aware of it, don't even hear it. And others are like, oh my God, it won't shut up. Why is it still on, that argument that I had in high school with that ex or whatever it is, right? And then you move into a place of these longer and longer stretches where it's quiet. Sometimes it only lasts for us in meditation, or maybe even a split second in meditation where we were able to like achieve it. And really what that achievement is recognizing the possibility in your embodied expression here that you can survive, exist, persist, even thrive without the nonstop thinking. Okay, so back to the infinite database thing. So when we talked about it in season 1 and a little bit in season 2, but mostly in season 1, the concept that the Chorus was expressing was like, well, your brains are sort of tailor-built for a finite data set. In fact, the whole job of the way that you thought here was to reinforce the idea of a finite data set. In fact, most of the time, you guys just really kept trying to boil it down to 1. So what's the one best job that I should get next? What's the one next step that I should take to get there? What is the next thing that I should do? Now, these concepts are sort of like, wait, what? That doesn't totally make sense. Well, it doesn't make sense to us because right now we're in a context where we believe we can actually only physically do one thing at a time. Multitasking, as of right now, is challenging for us. And that is because we are expanding into a place of recognizing how much we can do with our energy and the limitations of the thinking mind in juggling the thinking across contexts. So is thinking possible, doing multiple things at once? Yes, totally. We're just coming from a place where that wasn't what it was built to do. So the Chorus is saying, well, you guys are like a one at a time kind of species at the moment based on where you're resonant. So what happens is, as we start to approach the idea of the infinite, there are some hiccups. And that is part of the process of becoming conscious of these aspects of our thinking machine apparatus here on these frequencies that was not capable of contemplating all sorts of vaster possibilities and also multiples at once. As we expand, this idea of multiple perspectives becomes easier and easier to sort of ooze into or to wrap our arms around or to absorb. And so this is reflected often then in our expansion into seeing more of ourselves, which is reflected often in an ability to see ourselves across more aspects of the game board, including different time places we have existed in, which relates to memory. So memory, as we talked about in book 2, is, according to the Chorus, simply reconnection or connection to different frequencies. That's what it is. When you remember something, you're like, whoop, tapped into a different frequency. Now, this could seem unrevolutionary to us because so many of us have experiences of remembering throughout our days. But they point out the larger arc of our story, which is, hey, for a long time, you guys didn't remember anything at all. Like at all. Like you couldn't remember what happened 5 minutes ago. You were very much engrossed in a sort of very strict 5 senses, react to what is in front of you kind of experience. I did an interview on Journey to Truth in December, and I really recommend it. It's available on our website and our YouTube channel. And the conversation covered a lot of ground, but one of the things we came to was a discussion about ancient sites where some archaeologists have suggested that these ancient megalithic sites where there is no writing must have been more primitive because they hadn't actually developed a system of writing. And that's a valid perspective in the infinite universe of infinitely valid perspectives. But another way of looking at it might be that writing is needed by a race, by a civilization that forgets things. And as we talk about in the interview, one suggestion that the Chorus or that I have had in the course of these experiences is that potentially if you have a species or civilization or us before we forgot everything, where we can tap into any frequency in the infinite database that we wish anytime we wish it, we would never feel the need to write anything down. You could just have these incredible, pristine structures because within these structures would exist a type of being that can connect to anything. Their history is forever living and present in their embodiments, in their spirits, in their hearts. but that maybe if something had happened and we recognized in ourselves or in others a difficulty in remembering key or important things that would help them to understand who they are, you might write it down for them and teach them on the five senses wavelengths a way of trying to reconnect to or to understand an element of themselves that they can't just resonate into energetically. So basically, you put the memory on the wavelengths they can access, one of which are the wavelengths of visible light. Now, we would not be mistaken to think that the road out of here, when we're looking for a road out of here, must be paved in these types of reconnections, breaking free of the underlying premise of the game board, awakening to more of what was here, releasing many of the things that we believed here, and that's true. And energetically, we are all doing a lot of that as we see these things, as we grieve, as we recognize the shame, as we recognize the major components energetically of what was built here. Emotions are our energetic perceptions of energy. When we feel emotions about anything in this game, we are also allowing ourselves the energetic perception about those things. It reaches beyond the five senses wavelengths. So here we are, humanity, bumbling around on the game board, starting to see it and feeling all sorts of things, and a little bit at times overwhelmed by the amount of things that we're feeling. Some of us are trying to numb it out. Some of us are facing it. Some of us are going on vision quests and journeys to try and understand it. We're all creating our different modalities, our different ways of encountering or coming to terms with or embracing, or as the chorus would say, allowing these aspects of ourselves. And as we talked about in recent episodes, sometimes at the beginning, it's like it's a lot. That step of opening the garden gate, as we talked about, can feel like an emotional overwhelm because it's new to us. We didn't know we could feel so much. And particularly for those members of our society who have been the most discouraged from feeling or expressing emotion, this can be a very challenging step. Because the pile of belief at the garden gate, right, is a little higher for those members about things they got to see or recognize or console or allow in order to move through the garden gate and into more of that energetic existence. And if you don't have any of those beliefs and you can just move into all the things that you feel completely effervescently and freely, well, you know, your pile of beliefs is probably waiting for you on the other side of the garden gate. I'm just kidding. It's not a game of gotcha. Awakening is not a game of gotcha, although it really does feel like it sometimes. It's like, oh, you thought you saw all the things? Surprise! Now you're divorced. I have it on good authority that all of this is loving and all of this is expansive. So as much as it feels to us like, oh God, another pile of shit to get through, yes, it is that from our perspective. And also it's a pretty smooth trajectory of light. It is all light. It is all awakening because each one of these piles is consciousness, is becoming aware of this, of seeing it. It's one smooth path of seeing things, colored by all sorts of interesting manifestations in our reality. But even when we are certain that we have fallen off the path because this pile of shit is a particularly shitty pile of shit, it's still light. It's still illuminating. And because we are all on a path of greatest expansion, one that is allowing, which is loving, the reason why we are each being brought to these particular piles is because out of an infinite universe of possibilities, that next thing is the most loving, the most allowing next thing for us to see. We did come from a place where, when you were choosing a survival buddy, you would want to check for trauma at the door. Baggage, hurts, unresolved wounds, because it is likely that your choice of partner would carry those things in a relatively unchanged way throughout the relationship. But then awakening started to happen. Some people realized these things about themselves, started to change, started to be able to make different choices. Sometimes we think that years of therapy are required. We're going to need to talk and have squeaks and whistles, many hours of beliefs built up, manifestations created in order to counter the pile of things that we had from those prior years of hurt and injury. And in a five senses world, that would be true. But in an energetic one, you don't need a list of your partner's injuries in order to prevent or protect yourself from them. You don't need to read all sorts of books or hours and hours to try and understand them, although that is a valid process, an infinitely valid process in this universe. And equally valid then would be the possibility that energetically you can connect your heart to theirs and theirs to yours at any moment in time. You can see directly into everything that they are, past all the trauma and all the behaviors that they created from a place of wanting to be seen and loved. You can begin to access the infinite database of each other. Things that stretch into other time, places, other ways that they've existed and experienced this reality, where it is all remembered. It is all loved and allowed, and you even reach beyond it, even into the essence of what you each are, beyond the game, this great game that you played. I still can't channel the chorus, but I know they're here with us. And this episode is definitely not an hour long, but it feels like everything that needed to be said has been said. So maybe it's all changing. And maybe that's the best, most allowing, most exciting thing of all. We love you infinitely. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found these messages to be helpful. May they accelerate you on your path wherever you'd like it to go. For more information on the books which correspond to these podcast seasons, our podcast, live events, or how to get in touch with us, visit katieandthechorus.com. Thanks again. See you next time.